The morning Charlotte Pearson was told she would marry a stranger, her mother could not look her in the eye. That was the first thing Charlotte noticed. Not the words, not the name of the man, but the way her mother's hands kept smoothing a tablecloth that was already smooth. People only did that, Charlotte had learned, when they were hiding something bigger than the thing they were saying out loud. "His name is Nathan Hawthorne," her father said, standing by the window of their fine house on the hill above Copper Creek. "He has a ranch east of the valley. The wedding will be in 3 weeks." Charlotte waited for more. There was no more. "That's all?" she asked. "A name and a date?" "Father, I've never met this man. I've never even heard of him." "You don't need to have heard of him." Her father's voice was flat, the way it got when a matter was already settled somewhere she couldn't see. "It's arranged." Charlotte Pearson was 22 years old, the only daughter of the man everyone in Copper Creek believed was the richest in the county. She wanted what any young woman wanted, a say in her own life. What stood in her way was standing right in front of her, her father, his pride, and a decision he refused to explain. She asked around town in the days that followed, quietly, the way women learn to ask. What she heard made her stomach sink. Nathan Hawthorne lived alone in a small wooden house with a sagging porch. He wore the same faded coat to town every time he came, which wasn't often. He drove a wagon older than she was. The girls at the dress shop lowered their voices when they told her, the way people do when pity and gossip mix together. "He's poor as dirt, Charlotte," her friend Susanna whispered. "Why would your father, of all people, give you to a man like that?" That was the question, and nobody would answer it. Her mother deflected. Her father grew cold when she pressed. Once, late at night, she heard them arguing behind the study door. Low, urgent voices, and one phrase that slipped through the wood before the voices dropped again. "We don't have a choice anymore. We don't have a choice." Her father, who owned the bank shares, the mercantile, the big house on the hill, didn't have a choice? Charlotte lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, turning the words over like a stone she couldn't put down. The wedding was small. That itself was strange. Her father threw parties for lesser occasions, cattle sales, birthdays, election days, but for his only daughter's wedding, there were fewer than 20 people in the church, and half of them looked like they'd been asked not to talk about it afterward. Nathan Hawthorne stood at the front in a plain dark suit that fit him better than she expected. He was taller than the gossip had made him sound, maybe 30, with quiet gray eyes and hands that were scarred and sun-browned from work. When she reached him, he didn't smile the way grooms were supposed to. He looked at her steadily and said, so low only she could hear, "I know you didn't choose this. I'm sorry for that part." It was the strangest thing anyone had said to her in weeks, because it was the only honest thing. The preacher spoke. Words were repeated. A thin gold band went on her finger, and when Charlotte turned around as Mrs. Hawthorne, she caught her father's face for just a moment, before he fixed it. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Nathan, and the expression on his face wasn't the disdain a rich man shows a poor one. It was fear. Why would Harold Pearson be afraid of a rancher in a faded coat? The ride to her new home took 2 hours. Nathan drove the old wagon in silence, and Charlotte sat beside him, with her trunk in the back, and her whole life behind her. The land changed as they went, the dry scrub near town giving way to greener pasture, then to wide rolling grassland that seemed to go on forever, dotted with more cattle than she could count. "Whose herd is that?" she asked, mostly to break the quiet. Nathan glanced at the cattle. A pause, half a breath too long. "They graze this stretch," he said, which she noticed was not an answer. The house was what she'd been warned about. Small, wooden, a porch that tilted slightly on one end, but inside, it surprised her. Clean, ordered, shelves of books, real books, more than her father owned. A good iron stove. Everything simple. Everything cared for. "You read?" she asked, before she could stop herself, and heard how insulting it sounded the moment it left her mouth. Nathan set her trunk down. If the question stung him, he didn't show it. "Winters are long out here," he said. "You'll have the bedroom. I'll take the room off the kitchen. You're not obliged to anything, Charlotte. I want you to know that." She hadn't expected kindness. Somehow the kindness unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Cruelty she could have hated cleanly. This she didn't know what to do with. The first weeks moved slowly. Nathan rose before dawn and came back after dark. He spoke little but listened completely. She noticed that when she talked, he stopped whatever his hands were doing. He fixed the loose board on the porch step the day after she nearly tripped on it, without her asking, without mentioning it after. And small things didn't add up. A man rode out one morning, a well-dressed man on a good horse, the kind of man who didn't visit poor ranchers. Charlotte watched from the window as he handed Nathan a leather folder of papers. Nathan read them right there in the yard, said something short, and the man tipped his hat with a respect that bordered on nervousness before riding off. "Who was that?" she asked at supper. "Man from town," Nathan said. "Business matter." "What business does—" She stopped herself. "What business does a poor man have?" was the end of that sentence, and she was ashamed of it. Nathan looked at her across the table, like he'd heard the whole thing anyway. "Eat before it's cold," he said gently. Then came the day she went to town alone for the first time. She'd braced herself for pity. The rich man's daughter, fallen so far, and there was pity, in some eyes. But there was something else too, something she couldn't name at first. The man at the feed store called her Mrs. Hawthorne, with a nod that was almost deferential. The banker's clerk saw her through the window and straightened his collar. An old cattleman she'd never met stopped her on the boardwalk, held his hat to his chest, and said, "Ma'am, your husband's a fine man. Don't let anybody in this town tell you different. Don't let anybody tell you different." As if there was an argument going on about Nathan Hawthorne that she hadn't been invited to. On her way out of town, she passed her parents' house on the hill. She almost stopped. Then she saw the buggy out front, the county land agent's buggy, the one man her father always called a vulture in a Sunday suit. Through the front window she could see her father standing with his head bowed while the agent talked, and her mother sitting very still on the edge of a chair. Her father never bowed his head to anyone. Charlotte drove home with her thoughts louder than the wagon wheels. That night, she couldn't sleep. She rose for water, and passing the small room off the kitchen, she saw lamplight under Nathan's door, and heard the scratch of a pen. Through the gap where the door didn't quite close, she caught a sliver of his desk, papers spread wide, a strongbox open, and on top of the stack, a document with a wax seal and heavy printed letters she could only partly read at that angle. She could make out one word clearly: deed. Not one deed. The stack was thick, a hand's width of paper, at least. She stepped back before he could notice her, heart moving strangely in her chest, and returned to her room without the water. She lay in the dark, doing arithmetic that refused to come out right. The books. The respectful strangers. The nervous man with the leather folder. Her father's fear at the altar. We don't have a choice anymore. And a poor rancher, with a sagging porch, who kept a strongbox full of deeds. Who exactly had she married? In the morning, Nathan was gone before sunrise, as always. On the kitchen table he'd left fresh bread, still warm, and a note in careful handwriting. Storm coming from the west by evening. Bring the washing in early. N. She held the note longer than she needed to. Such an ordinary kindness, from a man who was clearly not an ordinary anything. That evening the storm came, just as he'd said, and with it came a knock at the door. Hard, urgent, 3 times. Charlotte opened it to find her mother standing on the tilted porch, rain running off her bonnet, her face pale as candle wax. "Charlotte," her mother said, and her voice broke on the name. "I have to tell you something before your father finds out I came. It's about Nathan. It's about why." Lightning cracked across the valley, and somewhere behind her mother, hoofbeats were coming up the road fast. Her mother turned toward the sound, and the fear in her face doubled. "He followed me," she whispered. The rider came out of the rain like something the storm had thrown ahead of itself. Charlotte pulled her mother inside by the arm, but before she could shut the door, she saw the horse slow at the gate, and it wasn't her father. It was Nathan. He came up the porch steps 2 at a time, water pouring off his hat brim, and stopped in the doorway when he saw Margaret Pearson standing in his kitchen, dripping and white-faced. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The rain hammered the roof like 100 small fists. "Mrs. Pearson," Nathan said at last, and removed his hat. "You shouldn't have ridden out in this." "I had to." Charlotte's mother straightened her spine, the way women of her standing were trained to, but her hands gave her away, twisting her wet gloves. "Nathan, she deserves to know. This has gone on long enough. Whatever was agreed between you and Harold, my daughter was never supposed to be kept in the dark like a mushroom in a cellar." "Know what?" Charlotte's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Somebody in this room is going to tell me the truth tonight. I've had weeks of half answers and closed doors. I saw the deeds, Nathan." The words landed in the room like a dropped plate. Nathan's gray eyes came to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw him caught off guard. "You went through my desk," he said quietly. "No. Your door was open a crack and I have eyes. A stack of deeds as thick as a Bible, in the house of a man the whole town swears is poor as dirt." She stepped closer to him. "The feed store man tips his hat to me. The land agent's clerk goes stiff when I pass the window. My father, who never feared anything in his life, looked at you at our wedding like you were holding a rope around his neck. So which is it? Who are you?" The fire popped in the stove. Nathan set his hat on the table, slow and deliberate, the way he did everything, and Charlotte understood that he was deciding something. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you, please." They sat. He didn't. He stood by the window watching the storm, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, like a man reading an old letter he knew by heart. "My father was Elias Hawthorne. He came into this valley 30 years ago, with nothing but a wagon and a milk cow, and he did what nobody else thought to do. While every other man was fighting over the creek frontage, he bought the dry land, hundreds of acres of it, for pennies, because everyone called it worthless." Nathan's mouth moved, not quite a smile. Then, the railroad surveyors came through and drew their line straight across the worthless land, and after that, the wells came in, water under all of it, 60 feet down. Charlotte's mother was looking at her own hands. "By the time I was grown," Nathan went on, "my father held title to better than half this valley. The grazing leases, the water rights, the town lots on the east side of Copper Creek. The feed store sits on our land. The church sits on our land." He paused. The hill your father's house is built on sits on our land." Charlotte felt the floor tilt under her, slow and terrible. "That's not possible. My father owns—" "Your father owns shares and appearances, Charlotte." It was her mother who said it, so quietly the rain nearly swallowed it. "The house, the store, the cattle interests, mortgaged, all of it, for years. Your father made bad investments back in '79, and worse ones trying to cover them. He borrowed, and borrowed, against land he'd never told anyone. We were only leasing." She looked up, and her eyes were glassy. "Leasing from Elias Hawthorne. And when Elias died 2 years ago, the debts passed to his son." Charlotte turned to Nathan. He didn't look like a man collecting a victory. He looked tired. "Last spring, your father owed me more than he could pay in 3 lifetimes," Nathan said. "The lawful thing, the thing my own lawyer told me to do, was to call the notes due. Take the house, the store, all of it. Your family would have been on the road by summer, and the whole county would have watched it happen." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I've watched men ruin other men my whole life, and I never once saw it make the valley better." He came and sat down across from her at last, and the lamplight moved on his face. "Your father came to me at night, came to my sagging porch in his fine coat, and begged me not to make it public. Not for himself. He said the shame would kill your mother and bury you. No decent family would marry you, once the name Pearson meant debt instead of money. That's what he believed. So he sold me," Charlotte said. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. "To settle it." "No," Nathan said it fast and hard, the first sharp word she'd ever heard from him. Then, softer. "That's what he offered. A marriage in exchange for burning the notes. And I refused him, Charlotte. I told him I'd sooner forgive the whole debt outright than buy a wife like a heifer at auction. I have that in writing. He has that in writing." Charlotte stared at him. "Then why are we married?" The rain filled the silence. Her mother had gone very still. "Because I'd seen you," Nathan said finally. 2 years, here and there, in town. At the harvest dance you don't remember me from, because men in faded coats are furniture to a room like that. I saw how you spoke to the washerwoman, the same way you spoke to the mayor's wife. I saw you give your dinner to the miller boy outside the church and pretend you'd already eaten." He looked down at his scarred hands. "So I told your father this. I'd forgive half the debt on the wedding day, and the rest on the day, if it ever came, that you chose to stay of your own free will, knowing everything, and until then, not one word to you about money. Because I wanted to know if a woman like you could ever look at a man like me without the land answering for him. It was pride, and it was a coward's way of asking a question, and I'm sorry." The clock on the shelf ticked. Charlotte discovered she was gripping the edge of the table. All of it rearranged itself in her mind at once. Her father's bowed head before the land agent, who must have come sniffing after the mortgages, the respectful strangers, who knew exactly who held their leases, the wedding fear on her father's face, a man watching his ruin stand at an altar and take his daughter's hand gently. And Nathan who took the small room off the kitchen. Nathan who fixed the porch step and left notes about the weather. "You let me believe I was poor," she said slowly. "You let me grieve a life I hadn't lost. Yes. You watched me be ashamed of you, in front of the dress shop girls. Yes." He didn't flinch from it. "Every word you're about to say to me, I've said to myself." Charlotte stood. She walked to the window because she couldn't sit near either of them, and looked out at the storm drowning the valley. His valley, all of it, the pastures and the cattle that grazed this stretch, and were never quite claimed out loud. And behind her, her mother whispered, "Charlotte, your father is a proud, foolish man, but he believed he was saving you. Don't." Charlotte closed her eyes. "Don't defend anyone yet. I need to think." And that was when they heard it. Beneath the rain, hoofbeats again, more than one horse this time, coming up the road hard. Nathan was on his feet before Charlotte turned from the window. Through the streaming glass, she saw lanterns swinging in the dark, 3 riders at the gate, and at the front of them, unmistakable even soaked to the bone, the broad shape of her father, with the land agent's man riding at his shoulder. Nathan's face changed. Not fear, calculation. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "whatever your father says in the next 10 minutes, I need you to know one thing first. Yesterday, I signed papers making over the deed to your family's house. To you. Not to him, To your name alone. It's in the strongbox. He doesn't know yet. The porch steps thundered under boots. Why are you telling me this now? She whispered. Because the man riding with him tonight has been trying to get me to sell your family's mortgages out from under me for a year, Nathan said, and if your father just found out what I did with that deed, then he's not coming here for me. The door shook under 3 heavy knocks. He's coming for you. Nathan opened the door before the 4th knock could land. Harold Pearson stood on the porch with rain sheeting off his shoulders, and behind him, holding a lantern like it was a legal document, stood a narrow man in a city coat, Mr. Greaves, the land agent's man. The 3rd rider stayed mounted at the gate, a hired hand, watching. Where is my daughter? Harold's voice was rough, but underneath the roughness, Charlotte heard something she had never once heard in her father's voice: panic. Standing in her own kitchen, Nathan said, and stepped aside. Harold came in dripping. His eyes went from Charlotte to his wife, and his jaw tightened. Margaret, so it was you. You told her. Somebody had to, Harold. Her mother didn't rise from the chair. After 30 years of smoothing tablecloths, she was done smoothing. I watched you carry this like a stone for 10 years, and I carried it beside you. But I would not watch our daughter live inside a lie you built to protect your own reflection. Greaves cleared his throat from the doorway, and the sound of it was oily even over the rain. Mr. Hawthorne, forgive the hour. There's a business matter that can't wait. I've learned that a certain deed was transferred out of your holdings yesterday, the Pearson Hill property. My employer had a standing offer on the paper attached to that property, a generous offer. If the transfer was made to shield the asset from— The transfer was a gift, Nathan said, to my wife. A man can give his wife a wedding present, Mr. Greaves, even in a storm. A gift. Greaves smiled with the front of his face only. Then perhaps the new owner would like to hear our offer directly. Mrs. Hawthorne, the paper on your family's remaining obligations could be purchased and forgiven entirely. Tonight, you'd hold your house free and clear, and your father's other debts would vanish. He drew a folded document from inside his coat, dry and crisp, protected all this way through the rain. Prepared in advance. All that's required is your signature, selling us the water rights that pass under that hill. The room went quiet in a new way. Charlotte looked at the paper, then at her father, who wouldn't meet her eyes, and she understood the last piece of it. Greaves hadn't followed her father here. Her father had brought him. One final bad bargain from a man who had spent 10 years believing the next bargain would fix the last one. Papa, she said softly, the water rights. That's the wellhead that feeds the east side of town, isn't it? The church, the feed store. Half of Copper Creek drinks from under that hill. Greaves's smile held. Infrastructure develops, ma'am. Towns adapt. This is simply commerce. Charlotte, Harold said hoarsely, it clears everything. Every note. Your mother keeps her home. It's the only door left. Charlotte took the document from Greaves's hand. She read it slowly, the way Nathan did everything, while the rain drummed and 4 people watched her. Then she crossed the kitchen, opened the stove door, and fed the paper to the fire. Greaves lunged half a step and stopped himself. The paper curled, caught, and was gone. That, Charlotte said, is my answer as the owner. Papa, no, not this door. Not any door that opens by selling water out from under our neighbors. I have watched this family protect its reputation for so long that we forgot reputation is just the shadow. The thing that casts it is what you actually do. She turned to Greaves. You may tell your employer the hill isn't for sale. The water isn't for sale. And neither is anyone in this room. Good night, Mr. Greaves. The storm is heading your way. For a moment, Greaves calculated. She could see him doing it. And then he bowed, because men like him always bowed when a room turned against them, and went out into the rain. Hooves faded down the road. Harold Pearson stood in the middle of the kitchen he'd been too proud to enter for months, and he seemed to shrink and settle at the same time, like a house finding its foundation. "The remaining notes," he said to Nathan, barely audible. "I can't pay them. You know I can't. What happens to us now?" Nathan went to the small room off the kitchen. He came back with the strongbox, set it on the table, and opened it. From the stack of deeds, he drew a bundle of papers tied with string. The Pearson notes. Years of them. A family's whole secret weight in ink. He held them out, not to Harold. To Charlotte. "The agreement was half forgiven at the wedding," he said, "and the rest on the day you chose to stay, knowing everything. I'm not going to pretend that day is today. You've had one evening with the truth, and truth needs more room than that. So they're yours to hold. Burn them tonight, keep them 10 years, or hand them back to your father with terms of your own. I trust your judgment with this valley more than I've ever trusted mine." He paused. "And Charlotte, if what you choose, when you've had time, is to leave, the house on the hill goes with you, and no debt follows you out. I didn't marry you to build a better cage." Charlotte held the bundle. It was lighter than she expected. 10 years of her family's fear, and it weighed less than a loaf of bread. She looked at her father, old suddenly, and rained on, and honest for the first time in her memory. She looked at her mother, who had ridden through a storm to stop a lie, and she looked at Nathan Hawthorne, who had owned half a valley and taken the small room off the kitchen. She set the notes on the table, took the string off, and slid them across to her father. "These are forgiven," she said, "on one condition. Sunday, church. You stand up in front of the town you've been performing for, and when someone asks how your daughter is faring on that poor man's ranch, you tell them the truth, that she is the wife of the finest man in this county, and that you are proud of her. Because, Papa, I am. I am proud of this house, and this porch, and this life. I've never in my whole gilded childhood been treated the way I've been treated in this small wooden house." Harold Pearson looked at the forgiven notes. Then he did something Charlotte had never seen him do. He put his hand over his eyes, and his shoulders shook, and her mother rose and went to him. It was nearly midnight when her parents' wagon finally rolled off into the softening rain. Charlotte stood on the porch under the eave, and Nathan came out and stood beside her, careful as always to leave her space. "You didn't have to forgive it all," he said. "You didn't have to give me the choice." She watched the lanterns of the wagon get small down the road. "You asked a coward's question with this whole marriage, Nathan. Whether I could look at you without the land answering for you. Well, look at me, and hear the answer." He turned. She turned. The rain was down to a whisper. "I'm staying," Charlotte said. "Not for the deeds, and not despite the porch. I'm staying because you leave notes about the weather, because you stop whatever your hands are doing when I speak. I spent my whole life in a big house full of things, married a poor man, and got rich the very first week. It just took me until tonight to understand my arithmetic." Nathan Hawthorne smiled then, the whole smile, the one nobody in Copper Creek had ever seen, and when he kissed her, the last of the storm moved out of the valley, as if it had only come to bring her mother to the door. They fixed the tilted end of the porch that autumn, together, though Charlotte confessed she'd grown fond of the tilt. The following spring, half of Copper Creek stood at the church on Nathan's land, to see the Pearsons and the Hawthornes sit in the same pew, Harold with his head unbowed, and honest at last. And 2 summers on, there was a cradle in the bedroom of the small wooden house, a daughter with her father's gray eyes and, everyone swore, her mother's exact way of looking at a thing until it told her the truth. Nathan built her a tiny chair for the porch, right where the board used to be loose, and on warm evenings, the 3 of them sat watching the light go gold over the valley, over the pastures, and the wells, and the water that still ran free under the hill. A rich man, and a richer woman, and the whole quiet fortune of an ordinary happy life. And that's where we leave Nathan and Charlotte. On that porch, exactly where they belong.